Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news, and ahead of the French Grand Prix, former driver Jolyon Palmer believes this may well be Mercedes' best chance of winning a race so far this season. Christian Horner of Red Bull seems to echo those sentiments, believing they will certainly be a threat. Could this be their best chance before the summer break? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you are new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Plenty to discuss today. Just wanted to look at this first of all. Points scored in the last 5 races. These are the top 6 drivers, of course, as expected. Red Bull's Ferrari's Mercedes, but rather interesting to me that Hamilton actually, despite the fact that Verstappen has largely dominated, of course, like he hasn't won the last couple of races, but 98 points over the last 5. Hamilton's still at 63, Russell at 54, not far behind. Leclerc, Perez, of course, Sainz at 68. All things considered, it's been a reasonable last few races for Mercedes. They've actually been on the podium, I believe, in 7 out of the 11 races we have had so far, which is pretty impressive given how their car has been, of course, look, largely caused by faults up front, but still, you know, they are expecting themselves to continue to come through the field as they have done so far. Speaking real quick of Toto Wolff, he did mention the sprint races because, of course, we had one last weekend in Austria, which arguably was nowhere near as entertaining as some of the ones we've had. I'm still not sold personally on the format, but look, as long as the sprint race is going to get more viewers than an FP3 session, it's going to continue into the near future at the very least. Next season, I believe they're going to do 6 instead of 3 just this year. I'm pretty sure the last one this season is going to be in Brazil. I'm guessing it is because it was last season, but next year they're going to do 6. And Toto has kind of said that hopefully they make the right decision on where those venues are going to be, because some tracks certainly look better for them than others. Like this weekend's one wasn't particularly entertaining, it's got to be said, but maybe they can still make this work as time progresses, but we're seemingly confident that the FIA can figure that one out. Now, he's also said a couple of days ago that he still believes they're lacking 2 or 3 tenths in kind of pure performance to fight for race victories, but the other side of the coin here has been, of course, the flexi floor drama, which has been continuing, which is effectively going to get solved after the summer break. The FIA are going to clamp down on that, it seems, and for the Belgian Grand Prix, the teams are no longer going to be allowed to have any deflection in their floor beyond what was implied by the regulations. Apparently, Mercedes haven't been exploiting this loophole, whereas Red Bull and Ferrari have, and he actually reckons, Toto Wolff, that might have been causing them effectively a 2 or 3 tenth of a second loss compared to their rivals, right? So after the summer break, there is some serious optimism that Mercedes might well be there within the camp themselves on level terms, effectively on the car front with the front runners, plus the idea that their third power unit coming in the latter half of the season might be more powerful and more effective than previous ones. Like, I think Mercedes are relatively confident they'll be able to at least win 1 race by the time the season is over. But could it possibly happen sooner than then, right? Despite what they seemingly still have as a 2 or 3 tenths of a second per lap pace discrepancy on some tracks that suit them rather well, maybe a victory is still possible. We saw in Silverstone, I think the victory was potentially on the cards there for Hamilton. I think he would certainly have had Sainz if the safety car hadn't come out. Then look, would he have caught Leclerc? It's tough to say, but still, the front wing damage of Leclerc could have meant that Hamilton might have been able to close the gap, and of course also had fresher tyres towards the end of that race. The safety car, of course, meant that he could only pick up a podium at the end of the day and probably would have been 4th if not for the questionable calls made by the Ferrari pit crew. But the French Grand Prix is a relatively similar circuit to Silverstone in some ways. It does and traditionally has suited the Mercedes car relatively well. Toto Wolff's also kind of a double down on the whole idea of the skill on the floor of the car not being, as he sees it, kind of in the spirit of the regulations that Ferrari and Red Bull are currently apparently using. It's still rumours really right now, but the FIA seems to believe it, as to Toto Wolff, because they're thinking, and their engineers have even said, effectively saying that, yeah, it's a nice loophole. It's a shame that we didn't figure out to exploit that ones ourselves. But, as the season progresses, of course, they are seemingly clamping down on exactly that. So, yes, we go to the French Grand Prix this weekend. I mean, here it is with 15 corners. Of course, the number of corners doesn't necessarily determine how the circuit is going to drive, because some corners are very front limited with fast sweeping corners, as kind of the French Grand Prix is. Silverstone, of course, in a similar category. The Austrian Grand Prix a different way around, right? So this is a bit of a question mark as well as to whether Red Bull, do they just suffer on rear limited tracks? Are they better on front limited tracks? It's a question we'll see. New regulations, new cars, super difficult to say which circuits favour particular teams. But theoretically, the French Grand Prix has been good for Mercedes in the past. It should be good for this year's car based on its strengths, and Jolyon Palmer wrote an article over at the Formula 1 site describing how he believes this could well be their best chance to actually win a race on merit. Talking about the last few races, that the fact that even in Austria, despite the fact that on race pace, they still seem to be about 6 tenths off the pace. You can account for that to some degree by the fact that Hamilton was fighting through the field early on. Russell, of course, had a slower rear wing because he damaged it in the kind of crash that he had on Friday, and therefore, he had to use a, old spec rear wing, to which point he is probably losing about, I think they reckon 2 tenths of a second or lap or something, just because of that kind of older spec rear wing. And the fact that then Hamilton wasn't able to really pit under the VSC at the end like Verstappen and Leclerc were for new sets of mediums. So when you take that all into account, probably he was only a couple of tenths, 2-3 tenths, maybe 3 tenths, 4 tenths, whatever off the pace. And also they were mentioning the fact that the Mercedes engine isn't so powerful at these higher altitudes. They're running at a kind of a lower rate just to make sure it didn't blow up effectively. It didn't have any issues like Carlos Sainz's engine did as the race progressed. So there are a few reasons why the pace of the Mercedes wasn't quite where it was, let's say, in Silverstone. And in Silverstone, he pretty much was the fastest car around the circuit. And the French Grand Prix does echo many things about the Silverstone track as well. So as he said right here, the key issue really for Mercedes to sort out, though, because in race pace, he's rather confident, Julian Palmer, that they can be pretty much there or thereabouts. Like they were for the first time ever, really, about there in qualifying on the Friday in Austria, about a tenth of a second maybe off. Hamilton looked like he could have put it on the front row before the crash that happens. But yeah, that's kind of the key issue here, because in terms of race pace, they've been okay. But if they're qualifying 5th or 6th, it really is a difficult task for Mercedes to seem like they can overtake the cars in front, just because their straight line speed has also been one of the weaker attributes of this car. So I think that's kind of the key that he's describing here, that they probably do have the pace potentially to stay ahead if they are ahead. But, will Hamilton and Russell actually have the pace to overtake? That's a massive question mark, even if the race pace on Sunday is better than it has been. So I think qualifying performance is going to be key. For the first time really all season, we saw some glimpses of decent Mercedes qualifying performance in Austria. Pretty much every other time they've been much better in the race than they have been in qualifying, but maybe the French Grand Prix could continue to be an exception. So he believes, as kind of the specific quote was right here, it surely poses their best chance of fighting for victory on merit so far this season, right? It's the Hungaroring in Hungary, pretty much a Hamilton specialty circuit actually coming up right after this. But at least before the summer break, before the Belgian Grand Prix comes around after that, this probably is the circuit that suits the Mercedes best out of all of them so far. And we can look at kind of the race pace, the last couple of races, as we can see. The Austrian Grand Prix, Hamilton, Russell are way off the pace really of Leclerc and Verstappen, but still you've got to consider those other factors. The last stint on the mediums here, it was much quicker because they got to pit under that VSC. As I mentioned in the early stint that Hamilton had stuck behind the Russell train, wasn't ideal as well for his kind of overall average lap time. That probably would have been rather closer to the front runners, but then you've got to consider the fact that the laps are rather shorter around Austria, so it all kind of balances out, I suppose, in the end. But still, they believe they might be more competitive. I think, Red Bull seem to believe that as well. This is what it was looking like at the British Grand Prix, arguably a rather similar track, where Sainz and Hamilton pretty much had the same pace through the course of the race. And Toto Wolff and the competitors probably looked at this and said, well, maybe Hamilton just as a driver was a couple of tenths a second or so quicker per lap than Sainz was, and therefore when you think about, where the cars were, maybe still 2 tenths down, but Hamilton, of course, was kind of on fire that weekend. And maybe a similar story here at the French Grand Prix. Now, Christian Horner of Red Bull, this is also a concern for them, just because they don't want all of a sudden Mercedes to be in the fight and Mercedes to be taking points off Verstappen or the Red Bulls in general, because then Ferrari have an easier time catching up. And I suppose it's still possible for Mercedes, however unlikely that they could possibly turn around this season in their favour. And Horner, we looked at this a couple of days ago, but just to mention it again, I would expect them to be quick in Paul Ricard. They're showing flashes of being there or thereabouts. The last 2 races have been pretty decent for them. There've been no sign of porpoising at all, which could be an issue at a circuit like this, because of course there were initial discussions with Mercedes that in the higher speed corners they were suffering with the bouncing a bit. Even at Silverstone in Spain, that was certainly the case, despite the fact that they dialed it out on the straights. But Mercedes have also said they are bringing small upgrades practically every single race at this point, maybe to the point where those issues don't affect them anymore. And it seems as as Horner says, they're slowly bringing themselves back into the game. This could be their best chance of a good result so far this season. This is just the circuit to look at real quick here, because if you look at it, it almost looks kind of like Jeddah in a way, but it does have a fair few fast flowing sweeping corners where the Mercedes does seem to be rather good right now. And also it was around Silverstone, for example. There's many corners here that look rather similar to Silverstone. If you look at turn 2, turn 3, even turn 7, turn 10 for sure in sector 3 here, turn 10, turn 11. Turn 11 is a really weird one. The corner goes on for so long, but turn 13, there's a few corners here that aren't really corners in a way. Well, they are corners. You can't necessarily take them flat out in this year's cars, but on paper it is a circuit that's probably more front limited and should maybe favour the Mercedes a little bit more, right? So if their deficit was maybe 3 tenths in pure performance at Austria, when you account for the other factors, maybe the deficit here is 1 or 2 tenths or no tenths at all, right? Obviously it's all speculation, and therefore it's anyone's game if damage and all this type of stuff comes into play. But I do think Julian Palmer is right. The qualifying is the key factor. If they qualify again 5th or 6th on the grid, I don't think they're going to overtake the guys ahead of them, but it's possible they could keep them behind depending on how things go. So definitely tweet your thoughts on that one in the comment section below. Just wanted to look at this as well, actually, kind of comparison for the drivers and the constructors between 2021 and 2022. Verstappen actually this season has 21 points more than he had this time last year. Not an overwhelming amount actually, but Leclerc has 90 more more. Of course, expected from the top guys. It's Hamilton that's really kind of one of the biggest losers here with minus 86, as with Valtteri Bottas, but Norris as well, 49 points behind where he was last season. So McLaren, they've definitely been struggling, and individually, I think they're the biggest losers, right? 82 points down on where they were last year. Ferrari, the biggest winner so far, but yeah, generally it's most of the the kind of Ferrari power teams that have benefited rather a lot. And Alpha Tauri, I think, are right down there with McLaren in terms of the most disappointing team, arguably so far this season. Aston Martin, not far behind either, but very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.